On the morning of November 14, 1950, a masonry foreman named Walter Crisp descended 12 feet into a utility inspection trench on the north lawn of the White House grounds, just inside the iron fence line along Pennsylvania Avenue. The trench had been opened since the previous Thursday as part of a routine steam pipe replacement project authorized under the ongoing renovation of the White House itself. A renovation that President Truman had approved in 1949 after structural engineers determined the building was on the verge of collapse. Crisp was 51 years old. He had laid foundations and poured concrete in the Washington area for 26 years. He had worked on the Pentagon during its construction in 1941. He was not a man who startled easily underground. He was in the trench for approximately 25 minutes. When he came back up, he told his site supervisor, a general contractor named Harold Emmett Voss, that the pipe replacement could not continue until someone with authority came to look at what the excavation had opened on the trench's south face. He would not describe what it was over the telephone when Voss called the project office. He said it needed to be seen. By that afternoon, 2 men in civilian suits had arrived at the site. They spent 40 minutes in the trench. They came up, spoke to no one on the work crew, walked directly to a black government sedan parked on West Executive Avenue, and drove away. By the following morning, the project blueprints for the utility replacement work, the drawings that showed the route of the trench, its depth specifications, and its proximity to the north fence line, had been requisitioned from the project office files by a representative of the General Services Administration. The requisition form listed the reason as administrative consolidation of records related to White House renovation. The blueprints were not returned. The project was redirected. The trench on the north lawn was filled and compacted within 48 hours of Crisp S. report, nearly 2 weeks before the section of steam pipe it was meant to replace had been touched. Walter Crisp finished his work on the White House renovation project that December. He accepted no interviews on any subject. He retired in 1961 and died in Bethesda, Maryland in 1974. His son, a civil engineer named Robert Crisp, told one colleague in the late 1980s that his father had mentioned the North Lawn incident exactly once at a family dinner in 1967 and had described it only as the strangest thing he ever saw underground. When the colleague pressed Robert Crisp for more detail, Robert said his father had changed the subject and never raised it again. That account survives because the colleague, a structural engineer named Philip Danforth, who worked at the same Maryland firm as Robert Crisp through the 1980s, wrote it down in a professional journal he kept during those years. That journal was reviewed by a private researcher in 2011. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as fascinating as I do, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. Now back to that trench on the north lawn, and to why a utility pipe replacement project would generate a same-night classified document requisition. To understand what Crisp may have encountered in that trench, we have to go back not to 1950, but to the specific condition of the White House in the years leading up to it, and to what the 1949 structural survey revealed that the official renovation history has consistently underreported. The 1948 structural inspection of the White House, conducted by the firm of Lorenzo Winslow and a team of Army Corps of Engineers consultants, found conditions that should not have been possible in a building that was only 133 years old. The load-bearing walls were failing. The interior floors were sagging on the order of several inches in multiple locations. The third floor, added in 1927, had settled in ways inconsistent with the structural modifications made to support it. The foundation system, as described in the 1948 inspection report, which is partially available through the National Archives at College Park, showed anomalous load distribution, suggesting either significant subsidence beneath certain sections of the building or the presence of voids in the substructure that were not accounted for in any existing architectural drawing. That last finding, voids not accounted for in any existing architectural drawing, appears in the inspection report in a single paragraph. It is not followed up. The report moves on to recommendations for the superstructure renovation that would become the Truman Project. The paragraph about unexplained substructural voids is present in the document, correctly filed, and has been available to researchers for decades. It appears in no standard account of the Truman renovation. The choice of language in that paragraph is worth pausing on. The engineers wrote not that the foundation showed deterioration or settlement, the expected findings in a 133-year-old structure, but that it showed load distribution patterns suggesting either subsidence or voids not accounted for in existing drawings. That is a specific and careful distinction. Subsidence is common. Voids that do not appear on any drawing are something else entirely. The White House has a documented history of subsurface work that extends to the earliest period of its construction. The original foundation was laid between 1792 and 1800 using a combination of sandstone and brick on a site that had been surveyed by Pierre Charles. L'Enfant and selected in part for the depth and stability of its soil profile. What the original builders found in that soil profile and what decisions were made on the basis of it is a question that the public record of the construction period does not fully answer. The original architectural drawings by James Hoban survive, but the foundation specification drawings, the documents that would show depth, subsurface preparation, and any features below grade, exist only in partial form at the Library of Congress. Several pages are listed as missing from the collection. The gap in the architectural record has been noted by preservation historians and attributed to the burning of Washington by British forces in 1814, which destroyed substantial quantities of public documents. That explanation is reasonable as far as it goes. It does not explain why the gap exists specifically in the subsurface documentation rather than in the above-grade drawings which survived in more complete form. By 1950, the excavation for the Truman renovation had already produced one unexpected finding that made it briefly into the public record before being absorbed into official silence. In the summer of 1950, workers deepening the foundation footings along the east wall of the White House uncovered a section of masonry that the renovation engineers initially could not assign to any known period of the building's construction. The masonry was described in a memorandum from the Renovation Project Office held at the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library in Independence, Missouri, as exhibiting construction techniques inconsistent with documented 18th or 19th century American building practice. The memorandum recommended further investigation. A follow-up memorandum in the same file, dated 3 weeks later, states that the masonry in question had been examined by a consultant, whose name is redacted and determined to be consistent with an earlier phase of construction. No supporting documentation for that determination accompanies the memorandum, the redacted consultant, the unexplained masonry, and then, 4 months later, Walter Crisp in the North Lawn Trench. But here is what makes Crisp's account different from every other anomaly in the Truman renovation record. He was not working inside the building, he was outside it, in a utility trench on the lawn, inside the fence perimeter but well clear of the building's foundation footings. Whatever he encountered on the south face of that trench was not a feature of the White House structure itself. It was something beneath the lawn. There is one more account that connects directly to what happened on the North Lawn, and unlike Crisp's second-hand silence, this one comes from inside the federal government itself. A Navy civil engineer named Commander Douglas Farrell was assigned to the White House renovation project as a federal liaison officer in September 1950. His role was to coordinate between the renovation contractor and the various government agencies with interest in the project's security and infrastructure aspects. His service record, available through the National Personnel Records Center, shows his assignment to the project beginning in September 1950 and ending abruptly in December of that year with a transfer to a posting in Norfolk, Virginia. The transfer paperwork lists the reassignment as routine rotation. There is no gap in his service record and no disciplinary notation. He completed a full naval career and retired in 1968. In 1979, 11 years after his retirement, Farrell gave a single recorded interview to an oral history project being conducted by a historical society in Northern Virginia. The interview covers his career in general terms. Toward the end, the interviewer asks about his time at the White House renovation project. Farrell's response in the transcript is 6 sentences long. He describes the project as complex, notes that the structural conditions had been more severe than publicly reported, and states, in the 6th sentence, which is the last thing he says on the subject before the interviewer moves to another topic, that the North Lawn work in November of 1950 had produced findings that were handled at a level above his clearance. He does not elaborate. The interviewer does not follow up. The oral history transcript is filed at the Virginia Historical Society's collection in Fairfax County. It has not been cited in any published account of the Truman renovation, a level above his clearance. A Navy commander assigned as the federal liaison to a presidential renovation project was not cleared to know what was found beneath the White House lawn in November 1950. The General Services Administration has never adequately addressed several specific questions arising from the 1950 renovation record. It has never explained why the blueprint requisition for the North Lawn Utility Trench project was filed under administrative consolidation rather than under the standard security classification procedure that would have generated a traceable record of what prompted the classification. It has never explained the identity of the redacted consultant who examined the anomalous masonry found in the East Wall Foundation excavation in the summer of 1950 and determined, without supporting documentation, that it was consistent with earlier construction. It has never explained why the subsurface void notation in the 1948 structural inspection report, the finding that identified voids in the foundation system not accounted for in any existing architectural drawing, received no follow-up investigation in any of the renovation project's official engineering documentation. Why would a utility pipe replacement project on the north lawn of the White House generate a same night classified document requisition unless what the trench had opened was not a utility feature? Why would the renovation engineer's memorandum about anomalous masonry be followed 3 weeks later by a determination memo from a redacted consultant rather than from the project's own structural engineers who were already on site and whose names appear throughout the rest of the file? Why would a federal liaison officer with the clearance level of a Navy commander describe findings of the North Lawn project as handled above his level if what had been found was simply an old drainage feature or a remnant of the 19th century renovation work? These questions don't go away because institutions refuse to answer them. The Truman renovation was completed in 1952. The White House that exists today is above the foundation level almost entirely the product of that renovation. The interior was gutted to the exterior walls and rebuilt from the ground up. The foundation itself was deepened and reinforced with steel and concrete. The renovation project records are held at the National Archives and at the Truman Library. They are substantial. The above-grade documentation is detailed and largely complete. The subsurface documentation, the records of what the foundation deepening found, what decisions were made about the pre-existing substructure, and what, if anything, was encountered in the lawn excavations, is present in fragments, interrupted by gaps, and in several notable instances filed under administrative categories that do not reflect their apparent content. The north lawn of the White House still exists, behind the same iron fence line along Pennsylvania Avenue. The steam pipe that the 1950 project was meant to replace was eventually addressed through a different routing. If you stand at that fence today and look at the lawn, you are looking at ground that has been consolidated, compacted, and landscaped multiple times in the 75 years since Walter Crisp came up from that trench. Below the surface, the substructure of a building that sits on land surveyed and selected by Pierre Charles L'Enfant in the 1790s, a man trained in the military engineering traditions of Versailles, who chose this specific ground for reasons he described only in general terms and whose full survey notes for the Washington site have never been published, continues in whatever configuration the 1950 workers and the men in the civilian suits chose to leave it in. Walter Crisp has described it strangest thing he ever saw underground. He spent 26 years laying foundations in Washington, D.C. He worked on the Pentagon. He never said what it was. The official history tells us the Truman renovation was a straightforward, if dramatic, structural intervention, a crumbling building gutted and rebuilt while a president continued to use it, documented in photographs and newsreel footage, and a set of project records available to any researcher who visits the National Archives. What the void notation, the redacted consultant memo, Commander Farrell's oral history statement, and Walter Crisp's blank silence together tell us is that the renovation uncovered something in the ground beneath the most observed building in the United States that was handled within hours at a classification level above a Navy commander, and that whatever it was, the decision made that night was to fill the trench, redirect the project, and ensure that no working blueprint of where it was located remained in any accessible file. These stories survive because people refuse to stop asking. If this matters to you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. History doesn't disappear when it's buried. It disappears when no one looks for it. Next week, I'm following L'Enfant's original survey notes, the complete set, not the excerpts in the standard histories, and tracing the specific geometry of the streets he laid out across Washington, D.C. A surveyor at the Library of Congress made a single notation in the margin of a 1978 internal review of those documents that has never been published. A notation about what the original survey plats show below grade at 3 specific intersections. You won't want to miss it.